Today's podcast is probably going to be a little more philosophical than usual, but we want to talk about the specific challenges faced by modern society when it comes to perception of lawns. So I'm Justin Hitt with Prosperity Homestead, and we've often talked about how you can have year-round green grass by maintaining lawns more like an agricultural pasture rather than as a resource-consuming ornamental structure. Now, lawns originally were high utility value. A lawn was, of course, for sheep grazing, and sheep graze very low to the ground. They bite off the grass. They don't pull the grass like cows do. They bite off the grass, and so you'd end up with very cropped grass. And even the White House had sheep maintaining lawns, and that's important to remember that it was sheep maintaining lawns. Now, as big estates went on, the desire for grass, or the mimicking of the wealthy, started to bleed over into homes. Now, you might be asking, well, what did people have in their yard before they had lawns? And what people tended to have in their yard was low-growing clover, herbs, different types of plants that would basically not grow very high. So the typical peasant, I guess, who had a lawn would have in the backyard or the front yard, they would have a huge garden. They would have like a stone walkway to get up to the house, and then the rest of the yard was pretty much maintained with a scythe or maintained with seasonally growing herbaceous plants that didn't grow very tall. So it was ground cover, basically. And what this meant for them is they didn't have to mow the grass. They didn't have to maintain the areas where they were living. They could basically let out a few goats if they had the problem of overgrowing, but they could maintain the 4 to 5 feet around the house itself. Now, into the 1940s and the 1950s, after the war period, there was a surplus in commercial application of chemical products. So a lot of the chemical warfare products from World War I and World War II were actually useful as fertilizers. So they added the salts and the nitrogens that soils were supposedly, under the theory of the time, depleted of. And then the grass desire, so people wanting to mimic the wealthy who had started using mechanical mowing rather than sheep to mow their yards, homeowners started desiring that beautiful front yard. There was a period of time, and then you can thank Edward Bernays about this. The advertising started to show people with more leisure time enjoying outdoor activities on their lawns, and then that introduces a new industry of consumer mowing. So consumers got better tools to mow and maintain their lawns, which was mimicking the atmosphere of leisure, which is the stereotype of a wealthy individual. And so people could feel more wealthy by having a lawn. Now, at the same time, and the name slips my mind, there was some social engineering going on, which was tract housing and basically building of communities that would be consistently cookie cuttered and look consistent, and of course a mowed lawn looks consistent. So someone who has low ground cover, it doesn't look consistent unless everybody has low ground cover. But low ground cover has no industrial or commercial value outside of the homeowner who might be picking dandelions or salad greens or other things growing in the yard. So as a means of keeping individuals busy, again, remember, sheep maintain lawns. It was better to control a population, and I think this community was near Baltimore, but the person who proposed the community to get approval from the local government explained how if people are busy mowing their lawns and maintaining their homes, they wouldn't have time to object to government policy and other factors. And this is and I'll try to include in the show notes links to that. There's been a number of great videos done on it, but here's the concept. In people's brains, lawns were associated with being wealthy and having financial means enough to have leisure, but the maintenance of lawns require a surplus of time, and so you really end up mowing the grass more than you're enjoying the grass. And finally, in modern times, today in 2023, you'll find people who pretty much it's a part-time job to mow their grass, to trim their bushes, to maintain the yards, yet they produce zero agricultural product. Lawns today in America use more water, more fertilizer, and more resources than all of the entire agricultural production in the country. So it's an agricultural activity in a rural space that produces no outputs. It only consumes. Now, again, it consumes your time, it consumes your money and resources, it consumes your attention, it consumes a lot of things that keep you from being aware of something else. So, for example, Americans apply so much fertilizer and herbicide to their lawns that it causes the failure of invertebrate ecosystems and other types of aquatic life. So we're putting nitrogen and herbicides and chemicals that when it rains, it runs off into waterways that kills fish and microbes and the stuff that fish eat. That's why you might see a pond near a community that's green. Now, sometimes they'll dye it green because, again, there's almost this poison of aesthetic where people want to look like they're wealthy with leisure rather than actually be wealthy with leisure. I talked to one homeowner near me who spent $9,000 a year on landscaping. Now, this was base landscaping, mowing, trimming, raking leaves, things like that. And they spent that money because they actually the gentleman was a doctor, the wife was a professional. They just didn't have the time. Now, they had to work 2 jobs and they had kids and they wanted the kids to be able to enjoy the lawn. But ultimately, it required them to have someone else maintain the lawn. Now, all the chemicals they're spraying and all the treatments on the lawn and stuff, is that really healthy for the kids to enjoy? Probably not. All of the effort that goes into earning that $9,000 rather than investing that $9,000 in the kids' education or retirement or actually just enjoying time with the children, is that worth the beautiful lawn? Now, don't get me wrong. The lawn looked immaculate. It was a microscopic version of what you might see in a park. You know, it's just beautiful. Yet I know that the management techniques in a park produce something where the management techniques in a lawn don't produce anything. It only consumes. So would it have been better to have a more modest, low-growing crop and enjoy the lawn at a park? So if they're not spending the $9,000 a year, and some people spend more. I got another neighbor who spent $21,000 on landscaping and then about $5,000 to $6,000 a year in regular maintenance of that landscaping. See, then this is not unusual, by the way. If you're paying yourself minimum wage and you're spending 5 to 10 hours a week maintaining your lawn, if you tally that up for the year, it is a significant amount of money. Now, I know you're saying, well, I enjoy mowing my grass. I enjoy the way it looks. No, you like the fact that when someone drives by, they're associating your lawn with affluence and leisure, not realizing that you're spending money and you're using up your time that could be better spent elsewhere. Now, what's the alternative to a lawn? Well, my argument is that the lawn is consuming your time, effort, and resources. And if you enjoy being in the outdoors, why not use that time to create productive organic food, vegetables? Enjoy a small leisure area that's surrounded maybe by natural landscaping that requires less effort and time. We can shift from the daily and weekly maintenance of a lawn to the quarterly maintenance of, say, wildflowers, for example, or islands of trees that are mulched. And you see, we can still have the aesthetic, that park-like environment, but we can take back the time and have the leisure that we desire. Now, it is good for kids to be mowing grass. You should really, if you're a grown-ass adult, you should not be mowing your own grass, okay? You either create the economic opportunity by hiring a company to mow your grass, especially a company who uses organic and non-chemical means of managing lawns. You may not be aware that you don't need herbicide in your lawn, and actually a lawn that is a blend between clover and broadleaf with a modestly cut grass. So if we cut the grass about 5 inches rather than 2 inches, like a lot of people do, you'll find that shades out the broadleaf, and the clover actually sequesters nitrogen from the atmosphere and feeds the lawn. The grass will grow much slower. And by the way, people who maintain golf courses and who maintain parks, they know this. You won't go to a park and see the grass cropped out at an inch, because then it won't be durable enough to take the wear and tear of people walking over the lawns. So now there is wear and tear, and that's where you start putting in paths. But ultimately, we manage our lawns with a consumption mindset rather than a productivity mindset or a utility mindset. So it might seem contradictory for me to be teaching you about year-round green grass when I don't really even like lawns. But if you understand the cycles of grass growth and how grass can prevent erosion, and how those deep roots of the grass will help soak water into the ground and prevent flooding, then we can start making the transition from the manicured, cosmetically, artificial lawn to productive landscapes that keep water out of your basement, that keep your, reduce insect, mosquitoes, that improve beneficial insects. We start getting a different type of aesthetic, because the visual value is, I'll look at a house and I'll say, well, it looks pretty nice. I'm throwing in there how much maintenance it is and other things. But ultimately, there are ways to make your lawn beautiful without having a lawn. And so there are people that have herb gardens, vegetable gardens. They have low profile herbal ground covers. By the way, there are some of these ground covers that as you walk through the lawn barefoot, relaxing and enjoying your lawn, beautiful smells of lavender come up, beautiful smells of lemon come up. There's all kinds of balms and things that really, I guess they tickle other sensations other than just that comfort feeling of walking through grass. But don't get me wrong, you probably see me in a few videos take my shoes off and walk around in a nice cut, thick, high density grass because it feels good. The grass itself shades the ground. It improves soil retention. It doesn't require any fertilizer. And if you do your lawn the right way, and we can teach you how, then it actually is less work and less money with the similar aesthetic. Now, again, I personally would rather raise, 50 pounds of meat out of that, and then have the other meat that grows on that lawn as a value add to my neighbors, or as a product for sale from a homestead. I'd rather have the herbs and the teas and the plants and the balms and all the stuff that I can go out and get from my front yard, rather than paying someone to grow those on an industrial farm or to grow them someplace else. What I'm really saying here is that you have to think about the time, labor, and effort put into any activity, and for less effort, for less labor, you could be producing fruits and vegetables. My grandfather in Silver Spring, Maryland, had in their backyard a postage stamp garden. The front yard had rows of beautiful rose bushes. It had little patches of green grass that was immaculately cut. But again, I learned the life cycle of grass from him. He was a nuclear physicist, and he was really into the biology of the plants around him. And in the front yard, it was beautiful. It had a large tree, a little grassy patch around it, and then a lot of beds that either had roses or ornamental flowers. And then in the backyard, he had a few grass paths, but he had multi-graft fruit trees, so kind of a backyard orchard. And then he had garden areas and a little compost pile. And it was shady, it was cool, it was fun for the kids to run around, except for the yellow jackets and the fruit that falls. But the neighbors' yards were giant mowed deserts, grass deserts with zero production value. I enjoyed so much more sitting under the grapes and just taking down, now we probably shouldn't have been doing this, but we'd be taking down grapes and eating grapes, and my grandmother would get apples from the garden. And this is Silver Spring, Maryland, which is right outside of Washington, D.C. This is not some rural community. In fact, these types of gardens that him and my grandfather and his neighbors had, and some of his neighbors had, was part of the beauty and aesthetic of one of the most successful communities in America. Now, of course, one of the neighbors had a 3-lane bowling alley in their basement. A couple neighbors had pools. It wasn't all just, it wasn't an agrarian location. It was rare to have gardens, but I got all the benefits. He gained all the benefits, and his leisure time was spent pruning trees and, putzing around in the garden and working in the garage. And the enjoyment was there, yet the applesauce was, us as grandkids, we just loved the applesauce my grandmother would make, and we loved the fruit, and we loved all the fresh vegetables. And then they would end up with so many extra vegetables that they'd take baskets to church, and it was now a productive environment. It was a producing environment rather than an environment of consumption, rather than an environment that's tied to a chemical industry where we're taking waste product and putting it in our yards. By the way, most of these fertilizers have handling requirements because they cannot be just simply disposed of. And the application requirements are very specific. More is not better, but ultimately none of it's necessary. Again, sheep maintain lawns, but you're not getting the benefit of the lamb meat or the sheep meat or the sheep milk or the wool. See, the wealthy people, you don't want to mimic the trappings of the wealthy. You want to mimic the behaviors of the wealthy. And the reason people are wealthy is because they have skills in accumulating assets and converting those assets to high utility value or production value so that they can turn their waste, which is what chemical companies are doing, turning their waste into lawn product. Do you see what we're talking about here? So again, when we are in Prosperity Homestead, when we have that permaculture mindset, we're looking at energy in and energy out. So how much time, effort, and resources do you put into your lawn versus how much do you get out of your lawn? Now, if you're getting leisure time because you hired somebody and you're contributing to the economic value of your community, if you're paying the kid down the street and they're going to use that money to pay for their school and they're going to use that money to buy a car, and you're contributing that way, that is a productive value of your lawn, which would free up the time necessary for you to enjoy it. But if it causes you to have to work extra hours, then you might as well have a normal yard. And see, that's really, if you look globally, a normal yard is low pile, combination of grasses and clover and herbs and balms and other stuff and gardens. The majority of the world puts a garden in their yard, not grass. If you are looking at it from that mindset of what we put in versus what do we get out, you'll very often see that there are alternatives far beyond the benefit that you gain from a pretty looking yard. Now, conformity and social norms and all that stuff aside, if you have a smaller yard because you don't want to maintain it, you can go to a park. We used to live in a townhouse in Williamsburg, Virginia, down the street from Busch Gardens. If I wanted to experience artificial environments and beautiful landscaping, I just pay $15. I think it was like $15, $20 for a local ticket, and I go over there and have a meal and watch a show and do everything I want to do. And my postage yard was mowed by an 8-year-old. So, and I had a garden in most of the postage yard, which many of my neighbors did. So again, I don't mean to be too philosophical, but you want to think about, are you the sheep mowing the lawn, or are you contributing in a productive society, creating some kind of outcome that is input for somebody else, is value for somebody else, that delivers nutrition and food for your family, that creates memories? I could go on for days about the memories of being at my grandfather's home in Silver Spring, Maryland, and just, eating fruit and enjoying the shade and playing around in the woods. We did throw rotten fruit at each other, and there were times people got stung, but my grandmother would put little tiny peppermints in the bottom of some of the applesauce, and we'd sit around the family table and we would enjoy vegetables. Are you getting that experience? Because that's what wealthy people do. I'm not saying my grandfather was wealthy, but that is a kind of wealth well, I am saying he's wealthy because there's a kind of wealth that has to do with family memories, experiences, lessons learned, community. And so even in growing up, being able to go and work at a co-op or to experience parks that are maintained by the community and beautiful parks. I would rather go mow the grass at Lodge or mow the grass at a park than mow my own yard, because I'm doing something. I'm creating a memory. I'm building friendships. I'm connecting with people. The isolated activity of being a slave to the lawn industry at your own home is as good as a prison. And then again, I'll put the link in the description below. Somebody thought about, if we give them lawns and houses they have to maintain, then they're not going to rise up against the government, because they're going to be consumed by the mental prison of an aesthetic or social expectation of a green lawn. I'm Justin Hitt with Prosperity Homestead. Very important things to be thinking about here, and a path to liberty and freedom when you understand production over consumption. Thanks for watching. Ask your questions at www.prosperityhomestead.org. We answer the questions here on the podcast and on the membership site, but I want to make sure that you are getting the resources that you need so that you can free yourself, feed yourself, and create opportunity for yourself. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next podcast.